Well, thank you everyone for attending this year's AWS ASEAN Summit. My name is Wen, and I am part of the AWS Professional Services team, where we focus on the innovation advisory type services. The team that I'm on, Innovation Advisory, works with our customers really on the business and people-related aspects of their innovation challenges. And so today, I'd like to share a bit about how we at Amazon approach innovation through a working backwards process, which allows us to create our products and services that our customers value. And throughout the last year or so, we've started introducing this process, working with our customers and sharing how you can actually adapt some of these processes as well to work backwards from your customers. So, working backwards is actually short for starting with a customer and working backwards. And what this really means is that at Amazon, we always start with understanding who our customer is, and then we work backwards from their problems or needs to really identify the products and services that really matter to them. We consider this, it's our thing, and what I mean by this is that at other companies, you probably start with a strategy or a creative brief. You might create a business requirements document, a products requirements document, and then you get to building. With us, our way of development and creating new things is through working backwards from a press release to the actual solution that we then go and build. And perhaps the best way to actually introduce what working backwards is from our founder and CEO, Jeff Bezos.
Is the working backwards process optional? It sounds great, but it seems like a lot of work. Oh boy, how do we begin? The working backwards process should not be optional unless you know a better way. And you shouldn't know a better way until you've tried the working backwards process several times. The working backwards process really does work. And this particular thing here, it sounds great, but it seems like a lot of work. Done correctly, the working backwards process is a huge amount of work, but it saves you even more work later. The working backwards process is not designed to be easy. It's designed to save huge amounts of work on the back end and to make sure that we're actually building the right thing. What so many companies do is they write the software. That's a lot of work. They get it all working, and then they throw it over the wall to the marketing department and say, okay, here's what we built. Write the press release for it. That process is the one that's actually backwards.
And so, as you've heard from Jeff Bezos, working backwards is a huge amount of work. It's not designed to be easy. What it is designed for is for us to really get to understand our customers and to get into their shoes to develop the right products and services. For us, ultimately, customer delight is our ultimate goal. And when we talk about delight, what does that really look like? And I'd like to share just a few examples of what we mean by customer delight, and also how the working backwards process had helped us to actually get to that sort of customer wow or aha moment. So, first example is we used working backwards to create the very first Kindle. The goal was to actually deliver on the promise of a book in 60 seconds. This enabled our customers, lovers of books, to get lost in not just one book at a time, but multiple stories, multiple books, anywhere and any time. Working backwards has also helped us to go and explore new areas to create more natural ways to interact. Here we have the Echo. Hopefully many of you are familiar with Alexa, our voice-enabled service. It allows our customers to use their voices to get info, answers, or even find items that they can order to be more conversational, much more natural and easy. And for example, you can ask Alexa, what's the weather? How's the traffic? Or actually my favorite tool as a parent, setting a timer for my children. And working backwards now has also helped us to look into inventing new technologies, new processes. Here we have a just walkout technology, the Amazon Ghost Store, where we've hopefully made convenience stores just that much more convenient by going in, picking up items, and being able to walk out without ever having to actually wait in line for a cashier. Now, these are examples of products and services where we've used working backwards to focus on customer needs and problems. That's not quite delight yet. When we talk about delight, we're also talking about what do the customers say when they've actually used our services and our products. And here are a couple examples of what we love to see. You probably can't read the text, so I'll just sort of paraphrase for you. On the left side, we have a tweet from a customer who just started using the Amazon Prime Now service in the US. She was gushing about the fact that she can actually order toilet paper, which she had run out of, in just under 2 hours and have it delivered to her home. This is a brand new experience, a delight, a wow factor worthy of her to actually post something about this. And on the left-hand side, we have someone who is posting who belongs to a tribe of people who no longer actually have a physical address. They like to roam around the US in trailer parks in trailer homes. And they love the fact that they can actually order anything and deliver it anywhere that they are actually headed towards. So these are examples of when we say that we create products that we actually see the customers saying, wow, we love it enough that we actually talk about it. And to bring it a little bit closer to Amazon Web Services, a couple examples of AWS customer quotes. On the left, we have a fairly cheeky comments about the low cost of running services on AWS. And on the right, a comment about how the new AWS Connect service has enabled this particular customer to be able to spin up a call center in a matter of moments and actually pay as you go for that service. So at Amazon, we believe that great products and services really do come from deeply understanding the customer. And this is what the working backwards process is designed to help all Amazonians, and of course, for any other customers or organizations that would like to adopt something like this, to really create products, not just from what's interesting from a technology standpoint, but really, how does it provide benefit and value to the customer? And so our process, it's actually pretty simple. It's really 3 steps. Number 1, we start with the customer. And then 2, we craft a series of working backwards documents that we use over and over again. And then the 3rd step, probably the most critical, is we take that starting set of documents and then we refine them, we iterate them over the course of many days, many weeks, until we get to something that we believe is worthy of being built and tested. So I'll touch on the working backwards documents very briefly now, and then I'll get back to them after we talk about how we get to these documents. But all working backwards processes involve these 3 documents. The first is a press release. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the concept of a press release. It's an announcement that's public for a new product or service. And we treat our press releases very much in that manner. We also include an FAQ to provide more information about the product, the service, or the business idea that is being proposed. And sometimes, if it's required, we'll provide some accompanying visuals to help really describe what is the product or service that we're actually trying to build. And these documents help us to answer 5 key questions when we review any new idea. Number 1, who is your customer? Who are you actually targeting in terms of either sort of demographics, interests, a very, very kind of typical understanding of the customer facts. Number 2, what is the customer problem or opportunity that we're actually trying to help to solve? And number 3, if we were to introduce this product and service, most importantly, what would be the key customer benefit? Why would they care? Why would they value this, even tweet about this? And number 4, how do you know what your customer needs or wants? It's one thing to be able to write a great story, a great press release to describe the customer and the needs and therefore why the solution would be amazing. But it's also just as important to actually provide the data, the proof, to go from we believe the customer will want this to we know that this is what the customer actually needs and wants. And of course, the last question, what does the experience look like? Can we describe the experience in words? Can you describe and articulate what a 2-hour service might look like? Or do you need some accompanying visuals to draw something out and provide some other ways to actually help enrich the description of your experience? So I'd like to just kind of do a little deep dive into the first three questions about your customer, the problem, and how you come to arriving at what the key benefit is. For us, we really like to start with understanding our customer. And when we talk about this, they're no longer kind of nameless, sort of formless target segments, but rather we personify them into one or two sort of key attributes, and we describe them as if they were real people. As an example here, we have someone who looks like a young woman. Perhaps she's traveling, and she certainly looks very happy to be where she is right now. And this is a starting point for us to really start developing empathy for the customers that we're actually trying to reach and provide value for. And we believe that it's not just important to understand what do young women in Asia want to do, where do they work, how much money they make, but also the context in which we're creating this service for. So as an example, what's the context here? It looks like she's perhaps doing a travel for holiday. Maybe she's just climbed a mountain. She's very, very happy. We can start thinking about how did she get there? What were some of the challenges in actually either booking travel, planning the trip itself, and even maybe the hike up to the top of the mountain to look at the sunrise. So we start really thinking a lot about the scenarios. We create a deep, rich story around our customer group. And then we encapsulate this. We put this into a simplified persona. And so in this persona, we highlight a couple of key things. We talk about the context. So we have a young woman. Let's call her Jenny. And Jenny's part of a group of millennials. In fact, a recent study has shown that 66% of millennials consider travel to be an important part of their life. And that by 2020, it's projected that they will be taking up to 320 million international trips each year. That's a lot of travel. That is a large group that you could be targeting and looking at in terms of how can we better serve their needs, how can we create value, and help them create a wow and delight factor. And then we look at what her needs are. What is the group that Jenny represents? How are they different than your traditional travelers? Perhaps it's around the idea of personalization. Millennials like Jenny may seek unique experiences for their holidays. She might be looking at, I want to go and live and experience what the locals do rather than go and see famous monuments or the top 10 TripAdvisor suggested places. She wants convenience. She's grown up with using mobile as her main source of information, where to get inspired, how to actually plan the trip, book it, and of course, when she arrives, how do you make last-minute changes? So we start to really try and get into Jenny's shoes. And of course, the key thing then is when you can start articulating Jenny's needs in her own words, this is where we start feeling comfortable that we are actually developing customer empathy. So just as an example, travel is important to me. I keep a list of places I want to visit, and I use various sites for inspiration and last-minute deals. I want memorable experiences in my life, and I want it on my terms. So with this as a starting point, we can now start better to understand who our customer is, what might be some of her problems, her needs, and therefore opportunities for us to serve them. And then we can start looking at, if we were to create services to address her needs, what might be the most important benefit that they can take away. So creating a good story about your customer isn't enough. We also want to know that Jenny, or the group of folks that Jenny represents, is real, that the problem is big enough, it's urgent and intense enough that we can actually help to address. And so how do we do this? Through questions, by answering questions 4 and 5. What we like to do is, when we go and revise each time our working backwards documents, we'll measure, we'll improve, and we'll iterate on not just the wording and the content, but are the contents actually validated through data? And so we do this through challenging each other, through showing them the documents, the ideas to our customers, and we look at the assumptions that we've made. We look beyond our own frame of references or biases, and we make decisions not by opinion, but really by data. And then we do this quickly. We iterate over and over again. And a few ways that we do this and that you can also do as well. First step, get to know your customers. And it doesn't have to be a fancy go and do a 3-month in-depth study of a certain market group. You can do some very quick and simple things, such as go out and observe your customers in the wild, see how they actually interact, and look at just some of their reactions. This gives you a really nice starting point to begin to understand your customers. From there, you can also have interviews. I personally like to do what's known as a coffee shop test, which is go to where the customers are, maybe a coffee shop, offer to buy them a cup of coffee, and in exchange, have them spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes answering a few questions that I might have around who they are. This isn't to actually pitch them an idea, but rather to get them to start telling stories to better understand what are some of their challenges, maybe in perhaps the travel space. And of course, you can also do other ways that augment this through, say, surveys and even customer focus groups. The idea is that each one of these is not meant to be very long and drawn out, but rather, can you do this quickly, cheaply, and very decisively? And once we understand who our customers are and we want to start proposing a solution or a service that might fit their needs, how can we do this? Traditionally, we might then go back and say, oh, we have enough information. Let's go and create that business case, and I want to go and build that app, that service. But maybe we can actually take a step back and think about, can we simulate the experience, or I like to say fake the solution, and test it out with customers to kind of get a sense of, are we headed in the right direction? This is actually an example of sort of faking the solution, where this is the first prototype mouse. So it was developed over 50 years ago by a very clever researcher over at Xerox PARC. And the researcher had an idea that perhaps there was a better way to interact with computers. And rather than actually build a business case and pull in a lot of market research, he went over to his local hardware store, spent maybe, say, 18 cents, and had half a day of his time to cobble this together, plug it into his computer, and then show it to a couple of his computer scientist friends, and had them play around with it, basically find out, what do you think? So 18 cents, a half a day, got him a pretty good starting point for his customers and to say, yes, I think you're going in the right direction. And then from there, iterate over and over again until the first mouse and the mice that you use today was developed. So that's an example of a physical prototype of simulating the experience. In the digital world, we have many other ways to also fake the experience. I like to call these concierge services. And the way to sort of think about a concierge service is when you go to a hotel and you go to the concierge, you make a request. As a customer, you probably aren't really thinking about how does the hotel or the concierge desk actually fulfill my request. For you, you just really want to have your request fulfilled, and then that way you can move on. And this is very similar to the way you can actually do this in the real world. You can basically take a request from a customer, a solution that you're thinking about building, fake how it's actually done, and then come back with the results and then validate whether or not this is indeed what the customer is looking for. Let me just give you an example of this. I hope most of you in the audience are familiar with Instagram. So when Instagram first started, the founders didn't just take their idea and say, okay, let's go build a mobile app and throw it out into the wild and hopefully people will use it. What they did instead was they actually spent a few weeks running a series of experiments in Central Park in New York City. And the value proposition they had was basically they went up to tourists and they would offer to Photoshop a few of their photos in return for some time to help validate their idea of whether or not there was a need for a photo sharing app and also some nice sort of filters to make the photos look more professional. So in fact, they actually went as far as actually taking the photos, photoshopping, and then helping the tourists to actually upload them into social media. A few weeks and hundreds, if not thousands, of photos later, these founders are able to validate their hypothesis that yes, there is definitely a need for something like what they were thinking of, and just as importantly, through these hundreds of photos and various treatments, they were able to identify the top filters, the most popular treatments that their customers wanted, and these became the first set of filters that Instagram introduced. So this concierge service took the founders a few weeks. It was free. It was a lot of work, but they were able to quickly validate that this was indeed a solution that provided value and benefit for their customers. And this brings us back to our press release. So when we work backwards from the customer, and as Jeff Bezos mentioned, we also work backwards by starting with the press release. It is a press release that ideally, when we're done and the product is launched, you could take it and actually just release it into the public with a couple minor adjustments. First of all of our press releases start with a focus on the customer need. In fact, the first paragraph would ideally identify who are the customers that you're looking to serve, what is the problem that you're addressing, and what is your solution or approach. We include a customer quote. Remember the quote from from Jenny around her travel needs. We start with a fake customer quote of what would the experience look like when they actually use this proposed product and service, to really kind of drive home, at least for us internally, what is the key benefit, how will we actually delight our customers if they were to actually use this product and service. And then we leap into the future. This is where our press releases are noticeably different, is we don't put today's date on the press release. We put it somewhere just far enough into the future where it allows us to think big. So perhaps 1 to 2 years where we don't fixate on what is the immediate solution, maybe adding a new feature to an existing product, but rather it gives us space to think about what would be a novel approach, a novel solution that we could realistically build. But we also don't think too far into the future, say 5 years, where theoretically anything might be possible. So this is one of the key aspects for our press release, is that we time box this with just enough space for us to think big, but at the same time not be too wildly unrealistic. And then the last 2 points, we avoid jargon and we say things simply and clearly. The press release is designed to be actually read by the target customer. So if the customer, for instance, is an AWS user, S3 would be written in words that perhaps a developer might appreciate and understand. Because ultimately, we'll take these press releases, we'll share it internally, but we'll also share it with our customers and have them validate that this is what we're actually wanting to build. Now, most press releases are only about 1 page long. It's a very lovely summary, but it's not enough information to convey all the various aspects of what the product is. And this is why FAQs are very important for us. With our FAQs, we always include 2 types of FAQs. The first one, the customer FAQ, is intended to address and answer any questions that a customer might have about the product and service. Things such as, how much does it cost? Where can I find it? And how do I find support if I have any issues? And so on and so forth. We also include a stakeholder FAQ, which you can think of as essentially what would be the questions that your colleagues, that the sponsor management might ask around, why are we building this? How does this align with our business initiatives? How much does it cost to build and maintain this as a product or a business? And other things that perhaps you would normally find in a business case. We include hard questions. In fact, with each review, there's always going to be very difficult questions that we might not be able to answer in the first round. These questions always end up in the FAQ, because if you can't address the questions from your customers, from your colleagues, then maybe it's not the right product or service yet to actually invest in and build. And of course, every time we share the press release early, and we share it often, we start gathering these questions, and they build up our FAQ. And then the last document that I mentioned, while not required, is always helpful. We like to include visuals. And visuals don't need to be fancy designs. They don't have to be wireframes. They can be very simple sketches, such as what you see above here. Enough to convey the message, to inspire and to actually help start discussions. We're very visual creatures by nature, so having things that we can see and not just read and interpret also helps to foster discussion around the process, around the product, around even, is this the right customer or the customer need that we're addressing? So this was a very quick introduction to the working backwards process. And this process, the set of documents, it's not the start and end of how we actually create new products and services. It is really, for us, it's a conversation starter to achieve clarity and customer focus. And because we review and revise these often, every time we read, we are looking at how do we improve not just the press release, the FAQs, but also really validate, challenge that this is a product that we actually want to build, that the customer is actually going to have benefit, and that even the need or the opportunity is in fact real. We ask a lot of questions. And with each round, we revise and we make the idea better. So much like what I described earlier, we start with that first initial document, and then we go out. We really get to understand the customers, get that data, that proof that they exist, they are real. And if necessary, we fake the solution. We create that prototype mouse, or we do what the Instagram founders did, spend a couple weeks to fake the solution, a concierge service, and then we take that knowledge, that learning, and we put it back and we revise it and we put it into the document again. And so ultimately, this is a way for us to push ourselves to really invent on behalf of the customer. Remember, our goal is to actually delight the customer. And to do that, we really have to understand who they are, and then we use this process to quickly and iteratively get to, is this actually true? Or is this just a lovely story that we've created for ourselves? So just to recap around the working backwards process, it is our internal way of actually approaching product and service creation. I've shown a couple examples of the products that have come out of working backwards. In fact, all products and services from Amazon, and certainly Amazon Web Services, start with the working backwards process. It has 3 steps. First step, get to know your customers. Second step, start capturing all the information into the working backwards documents, the press release, the FAQ, and the visuals if necessary. And then the third, the most important step is you're not done with that first version. You revise it. And in fact, even after it's been revised and we're comfortable and we start building, we still refer back to those documents to go, are we building the right things? The press release, you can think of it as your North Star, your guiding light to the why of what we're actually building towards. And we constantly refer back to that press release to go, are we building the right things? And the last thought I just want to leave you with is that the working backwards process, it's one of our mechanisms. And if you find that it's a very interesting process, I'm very happy to have follow-up conversations with you later about it. However, starting from the customer, working backwards, and iterating, the way we can do this within Amazon is that it fits into the broader culture. And later this afternoon, my colleague Lillian will actually be sharing more about the Amazon culture and, of course, touch on various other mechanisms. But the important thing about this is the process will not be enough for just every other organization. You really need to have a supportive culture in order to actually do this. And we think of culture as it's the way we do things around here. It's the core logic, the core set of principles and beliefs that all of our fellow colleagues believe in and ascribe to. And it also reflects the lessons learned that are important enough to pass on from generation to generation. And lastly, it is a set of shared values, beliefs, and practices that we have developed and reinforced over time. And the last thought I have around culture, are just to touch on some of the cultural trends that we're seeing that we're actually very happy to actually see with the customers that we work with on a daily basis. For us, we do see a lot of this fear of failure, that failure is not an option, and that a lot of companies are now moving towards what I've described as it's about learning. We want to start small. We want to run experiments. We want to validate rather than use opinions to actually make key decisions around our businesses and our products. A shift from command and control, that rather than having one or two authority figures that dictate everything, that we actually start spreading the authority, the trust for our teams to actually go and build the products and services they believe will actually benefit the business and the customers. And silos. We used to talk about, back when I started work, we used to talk about the silo between engineering, where I started, and marketing, and how marketing would throw over a bunch of requirements. We would have to interpret them, figure out what to build, throw it over, and they would say, this is absolutely not what we've written, and we would do this over and over again. I'm very glad to see that, especially here in Asia, that more and more companies are embracing the idea of having cross-functional teams working collaboratively so that you don't lose a lot of the time, a lot of the miscommunications to go back and forth. And of course, long due diligence, where rather than build out a business case that may take 6 months, 9 months before you actually ever write a single line of code, doing something like a working backwards process where you start off with that core idea, the hypothesis that you test, and then you quickly and iteratively get to what you actually want to build. So perhaps in the same amount of time, instead of actually having a lot of desktop research, you can actually go out and speak with customers, test out ideas, and in fact, actually be much more flexible about what is the ultimate solution that you release out into the market. And the last thing that we're very happy to see as well is that we're seeing a lot more bringing your IT talent in-house. For us, the working backwards process and ultimately the execution of the idea wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for our sort of access, if you will, to cloud services. It allows us to basically be able to spin up instances, run experiments very, very quickly, and also scale immediately. So being able to do this, especially in-house, also requires having the right talent. And we're seeing many companies that do not traditionally view IT as core to their business actually bringing it in and saying, yes, this is very strategic. And of course, the last trend that I'm very happy to see, which is the subject of my talk, was we're also seeing much more focus on the customer going forward and thinking about who is the customer that you're serving as a business, what are their needs, and from a business standpoint, how can you help them? What is the benefit that you can provide for them? What is the customer delight that you can actually provide them? And ultimately, this is why we do what we do. Our working backwards process is to help generate and drive customer delight, which is our ultimate goal. So I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much. And I guess next up will be McAfee.